Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is Joshua from Rangers of the East, and today I'm going to be going over the first of, hopefully, a series of Heroscape armies discussions. The fun thing about Heroscape is that there are a plethora of different army types that you can make. You're not limited to a few certain archetypes, but the other neat thing about the game is that the synergy structure does enable quite a few different types of builds. And so today I wanted to go over one of those types of build that is, I'd say my favorite, I believe, which is the minions build. This build is especially exciting because it is one of the builds that is going to be receiving a bit of an upgrade with the upcoming Age of Annihilation release from Renegade Game Studios. So, just to give a quick overview of the series, in this series I want to go over different types of army compositions with a certain baseline that you build around, and going over some of the different options that you can use to buff that list. And in doing so, especially right now, I want to focus on armies that will be receiving a bit of an upgrade with Age of Annihilation. Once Age of Annihilation actually starts to release, then I will focus on some of the more specific unit compositions that box offers, especially with the pirate faction that is being introduced and with the wizards, as they do not have too much synergy with current Heroscape units and are more interesting of themselves. But until then, I wanted to go into some army compositions which we already have now as players of the game, and how we can expect for these metas to change and evolve as the new expansions come out. So, I want to go ahead and get started with some of the lore. First off, I have some of the lore for the minions of Utgar themselves, of which we will be looking at the units of minions of Utgar themselves, as well as the 4 different heroes which play into them. So, the minions themselves are said to be dwelling amongst the jagged peaks of the mountains of Kyrie. Utgar recruited them early into his reign of becoming one of the Valkyrie generals. But even beforehand too, before the Welsh Sprint were discovered, these minions were Utgar's basically personal guard, right? They're a warrior society. They hold the strength of arms and might of steel, right? It says they're just very, very cruel, very evil, and they have wings, right? So, the whole point of them is that they do twice the damage of a normal warrior, and this is a reference to the rules for the minions, which we will get to later. Some other history. They have appeared in many notable conflicts throughout the current history of the Heroscape settings, one of which was between Utgar and Einar, where the minions actually wounded Empress Kiova in Einar Kyrie. Also, they're well known to be assisting Kee-Mo-Shi in trying to control various other units and heroes, right, in the realm of Valhalla, including Raylan, who we will get to very soon. And there's other, especially clashes between Jander and Utgar, because the original setting had Jander and Utgar at odds with one another, and so people like Sergeant Drake Alexander is a big, notable figure who was in contact with these minions many times, especially, again, when Raylan became captured and then corrupted by Kee-Mo-Shi with the help of Taylor and the other minions. So, let's go ahead and look at some of the heroes and units that the minions have. So first up is Kee-Mo-Shi. Kee-Mo-Shi is not a minion himself, he is actually a Mara warrior, but I wanted to touch upon him as his lore ties pretty well in with the rest of the minions, and has been addressed additionally in the modern Age of Annihilation lore, where he had once again used one of his amulets on Raylan. Right, so he originally had 3 different corrupted amulets of Ular that could mind shackle whichever victim he chooses. The first one was destroyed by Sergeant Drake after trying to mind shackle Raylan the first time. The second one is said to be given to and controlled by one of Utgar's other minions. And the third one was kept secret, in which may be the one that Kee-Mo-Shi is using now to once again mind shackle Raylan. But he has enough lore to dedicate an entire video to. He's learned the secrets of immortality and whatnot, so like there's a lot going on with Kee-Mo-Shi, and probably down the line we'll get into the more specifics about how he functions. The real first hero to talk about is Taylor. Taylor is kind of the poster boy of the minions, even with his high cost, which we'll get into in the unit stats. He was Kyrie very loyal to Utgar. He was found to be the strongest of 83 warriors that Utgar forced to fight in a gladiator arena style competition to determine who would be his chief warrior. Taylor had won the battle with flying colors, and as a reward for being the strongest victor and the one to become Utgar's chief warrior, Utgar also allowed Taylor to drink some of the wellspring water, which is an interesting point because usually the Arch-Kyrie are hoarding all the wellsprings for themselves. But Taylor's also been known to, except with Kee-Mo-Shi, he was the Kyrie who captured Raylan in the first place in order to have her be corrupted by Kee-Mo-Shi. Next up is Runa. Runa is rumored to be the daughter of Utgar himself, due to the level of cruelty that she possesses. There's a tidbit in the lore of where she is facing off against 3 Sentinels of Jandar as well as Raylan, and she uses her Helm of Might and Soul to basically vaporize the 3 Sentinels of Jandar, and also stabbing Raylan as well. Raylan only barely escapes, and then Runa swears her revenge against her, and that's about all we know about her. But the thought of her being the daughter of Utgar himself, it's a very interesting point. And actually, a lot of the setting has started to become a bit of the minions of Utgar as like a big family tree, because now we have a Taylor, we have Loviatok, who is Taylor's daughter. The lore says, though, that being the daughter of Taylor is not how she's gotten her power, but instead it was her own strength and savagery which helped her, and has helped her rise through Utgar's ranks. She's also hinted to have a more clever underlying agenda that is hidden to Utgar because of Utgar's fascination with just savagery and killing, that he's actually been blinded to the more clever way that Loviatok has been choosing her killings. So perhaps we shall see this expanded as the lore continues. Last up is Raylan. Now, Raylan has now been turned twice evil by Kee-Mo-Shi, and as you can see on the art on the right, actually once again has one of Kee-Mo-Shi's amulets, where once she was a protector with the defense boons that she would give off, now she's more of a lady who strikes fear in her opponents, as she now gives a defense debuff to enemy figures around her. So, now that we've gotten an overview about the different heroes and like the lore of the setting, let's go into some of the actual army building strategies for playing them. So, the minions themselves are a 110-point common squad. There's 3 members in the unit, 1 life each, of course, because this is classic escape. 4 movement, 1 range, 2 attack, and 6 defense. The big thing to take note of here is their melee capabilities. The minions themselves don't have any way to get ranged attacks out, but Deadly Strike enables them to double any skulls that they roll, and this is the main point about the minions, and whenever you're building around the minions, this is what you want to keep in mind. Because with 2 dice, you're likely to get probably 1 skull, which moves you up to 2 skulls with Deadly Strike. Sometimes you can get 2, if you get 2 skulls, you're rolling 4 damage basically, which will kill basically anything it touches, except for high defense, high life heroes. But the real important part about this is the fact that you want to find ways to increase the amount and number of attack dice that they roll, because if you roll 3, even 4 attack dice, you're greatly increasing the odds of the number of hits that you get. These units have a good chance to build a spike in the amount of damage that they deal. If you're rolling 3 or 4 dice and you get 3 skulls, then that's 6 damage you just dealt on an enemy model, and you've essentially just guaranteed that they're getting wiped out. They have a very hard time recovering from that. Or if it's a hero with multiple lives and a few of them get saved, they're immediately gone from being a very high life unit to being down to one of the last couple of wounds. So, in effect, these can be an extremely scary unit. The other interesting thing of note is their high defense. Not only are they difficult to maintain, but they're also difficult to kill themselves because they have 6 defense dice base. So statistically, every time that they roll defense dice, they're going to roll 2 shields. So to beat the odds of the minions, an opponent would have to get at least 5 attack dice, because then you're averaging out 2.5 skulls against 2 shields. And while the dice, of course, can always change in the moment, statistically, it takes a lot of upfront damage to actually kill one of the minions. The other interesting thing about the minions is their Utgar's Orders ability, which allows them to... It is basically the bonding option. Instead of taking a turn with the minions, you can instead take a turn with any of your Utgar Kyrie warriors that you have. Before, in Class Escape, this would be Tailord or Runa, but now with Age of Annihilation, we have 2 more Kyries who fall under this category. So this is the big, exciting bit with the minions, because of the basically doubling of the heroes, it massively increases the number of options that you can have with them in a game. So, now going into like some of the more neutral points, they function best as the core of an army, and this is kind of because for 110 points, you're getting 3 models. And this is, and this makes them rather expensive per model to have, and now the high defense makes them pretty difficult to take down. So you're not at too much of a risk of losing too many of them early on, but for them to function best, you want 2 or 3 or maybe 4 squads if you fully commit to minions, and at that point you've basically filled out most all of your army, and as you're adding in a couple of synergy units, you're really just finishing off the rest of what you have. So the minions work best as a unit that you build around, and not as much as a side unit that achieve some of the melee objectives in your army, at least without having major focus into how these models play in with the rest of your models. So, going into the negatives, 4 movement is the big one for them. They do have flying, which helps them a ton, but still just 4 space movement is very slow for them. They're going to take multiple turns to get up to the front lines, and that's just how things are going to be. No range potential, right? They're very good at melee, but that is all that they can do. Last, because there's only 3 models on a unit, it's a bit difficult to move said models up. If you have 2 or 3 squads, you only get to move 3 of them up at a time, so it takes a bit of time to get them developed onto the board. So, looking at some of their optional buff units now. First one is Tailord. Tailord was the first Kyrie to be released for Utgar as a hero, and is the main expected original Kyrie to bond with them. So Tailord grants an attack aura to all your figures within 4 spaces. It gives them 1 extra attack dice, which is huge on the minions, because if that extra attack dice rolls a skull, then that is an additional 2 hits that they're generating. So he also has flying, has stealth flying that is, which is errated on the card. The card says the rules for stealth flying, but it's only stated as flying, which is a bit confusing for new players, but the main difference between flying and stealth flying is the bit of text in the middle of the flying keyword of where Tailord can pass over figures without becoming engaged. That's not a usual flying mechanic, that is more exclusive to him. He also has 5 space movement, which makes him a bit faster than the minions, so you shouldn't have to reposition Tailord too much in the game once he gets set somewhere, unless you're moving him out of the way of an opponent's range or melee figure. The other useful piece for Tailord is that he can not only buff the minions of Utgar themselves, but also some of the other core pieces of your army, because his attack aura is not limited to any specific model. Now, the first detriment to Tailord is his cost. 180 points is a lot, and it's theorized that this is partially due to the fact that the Omnicron snipers came out at the same time, have a similar mechanic to the minions but have range, and so increase the number of attack dice at the time was thought of to be seen as a very expensive big mechanic in general. So Tailord was priced quite high in preparation for if something like that now or in the future were to come out, where extra attack dice could be very important. Additionally, he's a generic Kyrie in the fact that he has 5 life but 3 defense dice. This means that he's a bit vulnerable. If he gets targeted, he will go down fast. Next up is Runa. Runa is a bit of an interesting option because she doesn't, in Classic Escape at least, bond in any way besides just the fact that you can activate her instead of the minions. Now she's very fast because her movement is based at 6, but the same life and defense as the other Kyrie. And just a small chance to one-shot really anything on the board with her Helm of Might and Soul. It's a very small chance at a base, you have to roll a 20 to get it. But if you do, it can be an interesting game changer. Now, Runa, it seemed to be rather underwhelming in the community, but she has a few options going for it if you consider the strategy of your army before you sit down to play a game. I think that you have to think of Runa as more of an independent character. Runa herself does not bond with the minions in any way. However, the minions bonding with her allows her to be a more independent figure that you don't have to rely on using order markers ever to activate. Now, you can have all of your order markers on the minions, and then at some point in the game, when the board is developed, and an opponent thinks that you're going to push out with the minions and then moves things around accordingly, you can then use Runa instead and to attack a more vulnerable point for your opponent. You can move her up. She moves very fast, so she can get where she needs to rather easily. And then activate her helm to see if she gets that off, and if not, she can still do a decent attack of 3 dice. Her little perceived threat also makes her more survivable to begin with. Opponents are probably going to want to target more important pieces to your army than Runa. So Runa herself actually gets away with not being targeted too much unless there's just nothing else to target. At the same time, her only having 3 defense dice compared to the minion 6 makes her a viable target for opponents looking to get some easy kills and deciding that it's better to shoot at Runa and bring her life down than to shoot at the minions. This allows her to be a 120-point option who can be moved at any time in the game as you're playing the minions, to move her to a spot that makes the minions themselves become inherently more safe from missile fire or from enemy engagements. Right. Runa's 5 life will allow her to stay on the battlefield for quite some time, so she can actually be used as a way to potentially screen against the unit that might have negative effects against the minions. You could use Runa to push her up earlier on, and so that the minions can deal with their problems without the worry about other things interfering with them. And then in the late game, maybe Runa's gone now, but the minions can move on, change the focus, and as you move into the cleanup part of the game, the minions can do what they do best. Or you can keep her for more of the late game of having your minions go out first, and then in the late game when there's a couple figures scattered around, you can activate Runa instead, move her up with her considerable movement bonus, and then try to snipe a couple of remaining key figures right off the battlefield. So, additionally too, the new Age of Annihilation units that are coming out gives you a little bit more of and a couple of interesting choices, of where Loviatok has a much cheaper bonding option now. We'll get to her in a moment, but essentially, if you have her and another Kyrie warrior who follows Utgar, all of your Utgar units gain 1 movement. So if you have Runa, between Runa and Loviatok, that's 200 points, and now you have a bit of a core that between the two of them, they can maybe be activated by minions, or even other units if you don't go the minions route. But you do still have that increased movement bonus. So, all in all, Runa is an interesting character who is not a very hyper-competitive unit, but she can still do a lot more for you than you may have realized in games of Heroscape. And especially for draft options or playing more casually, I feel that Runa can offer a very interesting role and an interesting different gameplay style than other characters in this synergy list than you may expect. Next up is Loviatok. Loviatok's most interesting trait is that she feels a bit like a combination of Taylord and the minions, and Adlaga, the Kyrie warrior, all rolled into one. Because she has many abilities. First of all, she has flying, which the minions have. She has the same amount of attack as the minions have. Her defense of 3, we'll get to that. But she acts like a minion with Deadly Strike. But she also has Brutality Aura, where she acts a little bit like tailored, only once a turn instead of at all times. But still, you do get a chance to increase the number of attack dice that you have with one of your other minions, or any squad figure you want, but in this case we're thinking about the minions here. Whenever they do an attack and maybe whiff on an important roll, let's say you're targeting Q9, and you have 3 or 4 defense attack dice, and you're trying to really crit, and you don't get enough dice to, that you would want to reasonably try to kill off Q9 with, you can use Lovey Attack to help crit that minion of Utgar, reroll your blanks, and try to get more skulls on. If you use this and you go from 2 dice to 3 or 4, you just deal 6 to 8 wounds on someone. And on someone like Q9, or any high defense or high life figure, they're immediately going down. So she has a very good potential to just immediately clear off high value targets. She doesn't always give that extra boost that Taylor might give. But if you have a unit or model that's already dealing quite a bit of damage and maybe with the roll, you can use her to basically remedy that. And for 80 points, that's a very powerful ability. On top of that, if you control her and another Kyrie hero who follows Utgar, then all the Utgar figures, that means all your minions, all your Utgar heroes, they all increase the movement. And this is especially important for the minions because they go up from move 4 to move 5. And they become much more maneuverable. And especially for units with flying, this is huge for them because they need to go up into the melee. So, with all that out of the way, the main con to Lovey Attack is that she functions more like Raylan and most Kyrie than she functions like the minions themselves. She even has 1 less life than the average Kyrie at 4, and she still only has 3 defense dice. So, because of these things, she's a very appetizing target for an opponent, who would look at maybe even more than Taylor himself if wanted to target, because Lovey Attack has such a potential to spike damage onto somebody, and is a bit of a weaker figure herself, so it won't take as much in order to wipe her out. So with Lovey Attack, you have to balance her abilities as well as her just inherent abilities with dynastic leadership, with the fact that she can be taken out quite easily. So you want to make sure that she stays maybe more to the back or in the right position of where she isn't getting countered that well, so that she can have a few turns of really getting to use her ability, and then maybe later in the game you lose her, and at that point your minions don't need the movement bonus anymore anyways, and they're just cleaning up. Last up is Raylan. Now that we have an evil Raylan figure, Raylan also fits into the minions archetype, especially with Lovey Attack, who acts as another Utgar Kyrie warrior. This Raylan's interesting. She has a very strong movement, and more life than the average Kyrie at 6. And she has a slightly different mechanic in how she plays compared to versions of her in the past, where it's a bit of a twist on the head of how she runs. She now has a terrifying aura, which allows any figure that's within 4 spaces of her that you don't control to lower their defense value by 1. So instead of increasing your defense dice, it decreases your opponent's defense dice. Now you can argue that this is not as much of an interesting mechanic as someone like Taylor's ability would be at gaining an attack. But due to her double-spaced figure, due to her being a double-spaced figure, she has an increased aura range, right, inherently. So she can affect more of the battlefield with this. And she can just serve as especially a very survivable option to debuff high defense figures. Because think about this, the minions themselves are very high defense, so they're hard to kill. And Raylan just makes everyone on your opponent's side much easier to kill. She's also a bit of an anti-hero option herself with Twist the Blade, where if she inflicts at least 1 wound, then she inflicts 1 additional wound after that. Now keep in mind, she only has 3 attack types, so you don't want to attack high defense figures with this. However, figures with many that have a lot of life but not too much defense, who Raylan could conceivably get a wound against, she can go ahead and do an additional wound on, weaken them even further, and at that point that figure is maybe going to get able to be one-shotted by by one of the minions. Also, her defense aura makes it a little bit easier for her to get Twisted Blade to work, because she's a bit more likely to get at least one wound in. So, all in all, Raylan's a very interesting model here. Her being a double space figure does make it more difficult for her to maneuver, but she's up there with the highest moving and fastest moving Kyrie in the game, so that and flying don't make her being a double space figure as much of a big deal as you may think, especially with the fact that she gets a much larger aura range because she's a double space figure now. So, what are some non-minion options? These are all of the minion, heroes, and Utgar Kyries that can bond with them and give you a very flavorful army. But there's other options too that you can consider. The first one being Atlaga. Atlaga may be a little bit less important after Age of Annihilation releases, with Leviatak basically doing this very similar thing, and also expanding the options of what it means to gain that movement bonus. But still, if you're playing an all minions or all Kyrie list, Atlaga is able to give you that extra movement bonus that you're looking for. On top of this, Atlaga functions as a ranged option. If you noticed before, all of the minions are all very melee, cruel, savage, very melee focused units. And you have no range when you're playing just pure minions. So Atlaga functions as a bit of a ranged archetype. Well, not only does he have a 4 attack range attack, which is very good, but he also has the ability to potentially, on top of doing an attack, completely wipe out a hero with Bolt of the Witherwood. It's a 1 in 4 shot of it being pulled off, but there is a 1 in 4 chance of you completely wiping out a very important threat to you from your opponent's side. So this is more of a bonus than anything else, right? 1 in 4 games, you're going to be able to really change the pace of the game towards your favor. And in either case, you have a unit that can strafe around, can do some damage. The only downside with him is that he's only 4 life. So he's another one of those squishy Kyrie. But him being ranged, and your minions being far up front, also do mean that he's a little bit less prone to be attacked by range. Next up, Kazumet the Dark Lord. The meme unit of Heroscape, second to Dund. Kazumet, I'd argue, is a little bit more viable now in this list. He's a 75-point alternative to Taylord, who only affects units that are adjacent to him instead of within 4 clear side spaces. He doesn't have flying, but he does have 6 move, which is pretty good. And especially with Leviatak, that can easily be increased to 7, because he is a unit who follows Utgar. And while Unleashed Fury enhancement does not really affect this list unless you bring a bunch of basically the werewolves, which I don't think would be very viable, because then you have 2 different common squad melee options competing with one another, and that does not seem very viable in this case because the minions are so expensive already. The Relentless Assault personality trait opens you up to doing a couple different things with the list. Because with this idea, you could now fit in someone like Krug, or even VC units like Boreos, the Wind Elemental, or just the Wind Elemental themselves from the official line. It's just really one of many different figures you have of relentless personality in the game that, through Kazumet, can slightly bond with one another. Now, you have to be very careful again, because 3 life, 3 defense, he's not very useful. If anything, you can think of him as a way to be a threat, right, to your opponent, and as a way to get your opponent to take his eyes off the minions and onto Kazumet for a bit. And you might want to run a more older version of Raylan who does some healing buffs on him to bring that defense dice up. So, he's still not too viable, but in the right circumstances, most of the minions now, basically with the one exception of Runa, all bond with Kazumet now. So, he's an interesting choice all in all. Not very effective competitively in bonding, but if you can find a good way to get him to stay hidden, or for him to to regain wounds or whatnot, or just to be a good distraction piece, he may be a more he's at least a very cheap alternative to Taylord, right? And he functions as a way for, in the right circumstance or in the right instance, being able to help crit out the minions of Utgar's attacks, or Lovi attacks for that matter, without spending 180 points. Next up, I want to bring up Sylvaris. Sylvaris has a huge threat range, right? Move of 5 and a range of 9. A lot of the time, you find a good spot for Sylvaris to be on in the first or second activation for him, and you should sit on there the rest of the game. Flat 100 points, he's easy to fit into anything, and he has double attack. Usually you're going to be doing 4 attack dice because you're going to be prioritizing figures who you have hide against, but you're not forced into that. So you're essentially getting 2 attacks of 4 with Sylvaris at a range of 9. Now, what does that give you? What is the point of bringing Sylvaris? The point I'd say is that it really forces your opponent to come to you. Since you're playing a melee-focused list, you want to do everything in your power to eliminate any difficulties in bringing your models to your opponent. Because every squad of minions is going to need to take probably 2 turns to reach your opponent's side, if not a 3rd turn. So what Sylvaris does is help to close that gap. Sylvaris can outshoot most anyone in the game, so in order for your opponent to be able to react properly, they can't just sit in the back, right, and just wipe down your unit. Sylvaris acts as a threat bringer to go ahead and start dealing damage out to your opponent's models and force them to come to you in a bit. And then as they get closer to try to attack Sylvaris, that opens the options for you to bring the minions out in a more quicker way and quickly be able to deal with the threats that your opponents have. So, additionally, once the minions are more forward out, Sylvaris being able to beat so far back keeps him alive a lot longer, right? Because he has very few defense dice, with just 2 defense, 4 life. He's very weak, but if he can just be far enough away, he doesn't have to worry about that because all of the attacks are going on the 6 defense minions. But again, the only downside here is that since he is a ranged figure, basically, he doesn't have any bonding options with the rest of your build. But he does have synergy in the fact that he acts as a good piece in order to bring your opponent's figures to you faster. So he's almost a movement buff for the minions. Speaking of set types models, I now want to go into the Krav Maga, who are the squad equivalent of this. Now the Krav Maga have to get a little bit closer in order to do their same thing with range screening, because they only have a range of 7, but they have a move of 6, which is incredible, and stealth dodge is incredible for them, because it allows you to basically control the range battle on the battlefield, because if they roll 1 shield in their defense, which you're statistically going to get with 3 defense dice, maybe even 4 if you're on height, they're going to be extremely difficult to take down, and they're going to force your opponent not only to come closer to you, but to come all the way into melee range with you. Which isn't as difficult as with Sylvaris, because there's 3 of them and they're only 7 spaces away. But still, they act as a unit that has to be attacked at melee to be for your opponent to get useful order markers out of. So, but the caveat being that they are a unique squad, so once the figures start dying, the squad immediately loses a lot of its usability. Next up are the Omicron Snipers. This is the unit that it's apparently why Taylord is costed so highly. These are essentially the ranged equivalent of the minions of Utgar, where they have the same type of rule, but the range version, because these people can shoot up to 7 spaces away. Now they do have 1 less attack dice. They're 10 points cheaper. They only have 3 defense dice, range of 7. So all in all, they're decent. If you get them on height, you're probably going to get about 2 hits with each one a turn. And with that, you'll probably take somebody out each turn or deal some kind of damage. Now the real interesting bit is the way that they can also bond with Taylord. Because Taylord increases their attack even further. So with this option in mind, if you have a couple of snipers and a couple of minions and Taylord in the middle, you can change your build strategy depending on the map, depending on who you're up against or the scenario, in order to accommodate for different opponent strategies. Where now, if you need a way to play the ranged game yourself, you have that option because the snipers exist. And they're just as effective in melee, it's just that their defense is a lot lower. So, unless you can kill your opponent before they can kill you, you're probably going to go down quite fast. But again, if the minions are in front of them screening you, then as long as they're not preventing you from seeing your opponent's models, that is, you're in a pretty good stance in order to get some damage in yourself. So, but again, there are high costs as a squad, and the minions' inherent high cost for a squad makes it more difficult to run builds with both the snipers and the minions themselves. But potentially they could act as a replacement to the minions. With the new minion heroes that have been created, the option is now on the table for synergy between the minion heroes instead of just with the minion squad. So if you want to have a bit of a minion hero synergy, you could potentially have that option and have them buff each other, and then have the snipers that are in the back doing all the dirty work. So we've gone over all the different options. I now have each of the units that I've talked about listed here and the point values, and I just want to talk a bit about some different list options now that we've gone over the strengths and weaknesses of different items in the build. Now, the minions are 110 points each, which makes them surprisingly a little bit difficult to fit into lists, because they're not exactly at 100 points, they're a little bit more than that. So, when you're running and creating a list with them, a lot of the time you run into the fact that you're either you have a little bit less than 100 points left, or you're dealing with a lot of points left. So, at 400 points, the easiest list to do, 2 minions tailored. I ran it actually just last night. I played against one of my friends, and with the small exceptions of tailored being a bit risky, I'd say 3 defense model who's a lot easier to be taken down. I took 3 wounds on tailored in that game, but I was still able to even use tailored as a bit of bait, where I moved tailored up to a point where an opponent's ancient car could come into range and try to do some damage on him, and he did do some damage, but immediately afterwards I was able to move the minions that were nearby and able to help tailored to move them back, and with tailored bonus and with height, immediately cut down ancient car. So even with the more finicky parts of running tailored, tailored still acts as a good decoy option, right? And most of the Kyrie heroes will. They're a bit of the damage sinks, right? They prevent your minions from getting hit with an accidental high damage blow and wiping one of them out, because it went to one of your heroes instead. You could also run, instead of tailored, you could run both Raylan and Loviatok. Raylan and Loviatok cost the same amount as tailored, and on top of being 2 different heroes that you now have instead of 1, you still have some of the benefits of Loviatok, providing some of the same, similar but slightly differently worded abilities that tailored provided. You also have a secondary hero for your minions to be basically screened against with Raylan and with defense buffs, and it creates a different dynamic, right? Slightly, you now have 8 figures instead of 7, 2 of them are heroes, so you have more life going around. You have a different dynamic you can play around with, especially with Raylan being such a damage sink with the 6 life, right? It really opens you up to having a lot of options on the table. You even have a bit of a movement buff as long as both your heroes are still alive. So, as Age of Annihilation comes out, this may be the more optimal way to play this 400 point list. Or you can just do 3 minions and then fill up your remaining 70 points with something else. Some people just like the idea of just how the minions run as a unit that does good on its own and doesn't need a lot of help with it. And so this is a very viable strategy of if you just want to run the minions and then something else on the side, maybe rats, maybe some kind of ranged support, just something that's around 70 points and can help you out. This is an option. Moving up to 500 points, I think the main way to buff the army even more, because you can't just throw in another squad of minions unless you're just doing 4 squads of minions and something else, is that you can take one of the 2 main builds above and then you can add Atlaga, the Crab, or Sylvaris to it. And this just depends about how you want to play the list. Each of these options gives you some form of a ranged buff. Atlaga also gives you a bit of a movement buff as well as a potential game-changing save. But mostly you use Atlaga for movement and a bit of range, the Craft for a bit of distributed and melee pushing range counters, and Silvaris for just sniping from far away and forcing some of your opponent's more niche models and more like squishy models in general to like be pushed further up or go all the way back and be useless. So any of these options could be good. It depends on the way you want to run the list, right? I'm thinking about Runa again. Another option at 500 is 3 minions, Runa and Damaro. This list is mostly one that you mostly think of this as a 3x minions list. That also has some ranged support with the Mardo warriors. The Mardo are very good because of the fact that they can use water clone, so that after you lose a couple of them, you can wait some time with them and bring them back, and then finish the game off with a full squad of Mardo for cleanup. You also have 3 squads of minions, which can use quite a bit, and then Runa acts as your interesting decoy piece that can, basically whenever you want to activate her, you can choose to activate her instead of the minions, and have her go off and do her own thing, and employ some of the potential strategies that I talked about earlier. Now moving into the 600 points category, now you have the options of 3 minions, and Loviatak and Runa as a potential option for having Loviatak with another low appointed Utgar Kyrie hero in order to get the movement bonus, and you still have 70 points of filler that you can add on something. You can replace Runa as well with Raylan, and then have 90 points of filler left. It's just up to you. You can maybe add Atlaga in at that point, potentially 3 minions, Loviatak, Raylan, and Atlaga, making a 600 point list. It's up to you and the way that you want to play. How fast do you feel like you need to move across the board, especially because some of the activations with movement become less important once you've reached the other side of the field, of course. With all that in mind, though, I hope you can see that there are quite a lot of different ways that you can play the minions. You can either, especially with the upcoming Age of Annihilation expansion, you can add on some very interesting, specifically minion style lists, but then there's also a lot of other units that exist in the larger Heroscape lineup of different types of heroes and squads that all find some way to effectively play alongside the minions and find ways to either buff some of the weaknesses or move into their strengths and give them additional benefits. With the addition of more relentless units that fit into this theme, even units like Consummate can maybe find some play now if you have a point where you can fit in 75 to 80 points into your list. You can also throw in some other units too, like maybe Krug works now as a potential addition. Krug, like hiding a Consummate, could be an interesting play. With that in mind, though, please let me know what ideas that you have, viewers, for any minions list you've run in the past, and maybe want to do theory crafting now, now that some of these newer heroes are out. Especially, the doors have opened to any kind of Utgar squads because of Loviatak's own synergy with any kind of Utgar units. So, with everything in mind, please let me know in the comments below your thoughts, and until next time, keep on scaping. Thanks for watching.